At exactly 5:12 a.m., the lake behind my house stopped being peaceful forever. I was standing on my dock like I had done every morning for the last 20 years. Fishing rod in my hand, silence all around. The kind of silence that lets you remember the people you've lost. That lake wasn't just water to me. It was memory. It was grief. It was healing. Then I heard footsteps. High heels. Unravel. I turned and saw Sandra Kirkpatrick. Perfect hair. Designer jacket. Clipboard under her arm. And in her hands, a 50-pound bag of copper sulfate. Before I could speak, she dumped it straight into the lake. The air changed instantly. Sharp, metallic, wrong. Within minutes, the water near her feet turned a sick, glowing green. By noon, the first base floated to the surface. By evening, the shoreline was lined with dead fish. I held one in my hands when Sandra looked straight at me, smiled, and said, "It's just algae control. This is a decorative pond now." Then she walked away. What Sandra didn't know, and what she never bothered to check, was that this lake wasn't decorative. My name is Dale Hutchinson. I'm 58 years old, and I spent 30 years protecting America's drinking water as a treatment plant supervisor. When I retired, my wife Sarah and I moved here for one reason only, and this spring-fed lake. When cancer took Sarah 3 years ago, this water became the only place I could still feel close to her. Sandra saw a pond. I saw a lifeline. What most people in this neighborhood didn't understand was simple. We don't use city water. Every house here pulls drinking water from private wells, connected to the same limestone aquifer that feeds this lake. Sandra wasn't killing fish. She was poisoning people. And standing on the shore that morning, watching that chemical spread, I realized something terrifying. By the time I finished documenting what she had done, the entire neighborhood would already be drinking it. And the next phone call I made would turn this into a federal case. By noon, the smell hit the neighborhood. It wasn't just fish anymore. It was metal, bitter, sharp. I watched Aisha Johnson step back from the shoreline, covering her mouth as another fish rolled onto its side. Nyla Brown pulled out her phone, recording everything with shaking hands. Keisha Carter whispered something I couldn't hear, her eyes fixed on the water like it had betrayed her. They weren't tourists. They lived here. Aisha was the first to speak. "Mr. Hutchinson, my little brother drinks from our well. Is this safe?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was heavy. I walked them over to the edge of the dock and pointed to the narrow stream flowing out of the lake, hidden behind reeds and cattails. "That water doesn't stop here," I said. "It moves underground, straight into your wells." Silence fell. Nyla lowered her phone. Keisha's face went pale. "Copper sulfate doesn't just kill algae. In small doses, it damages the liver. In larger ones, it attacks the kidneys. In children, it's worse." By the time Sandra Kirkpatrick called this lake decorative, at least 12 homes had already pumped contaminated water straight into their kitchens. Within hours, the neighborhood group chat exploded. Headaches, metallic taste, nausea. One message stood out. "Why does my tap water smell like coins?" That was when I stopped filming and started calling. The county water office answered first, then environmental health, then the state. Every person I spoke to asked the same question. Did the HOA approve chemical treatment? I told them no, because Sandra didn't ask permission. She assumed authority. At exactly 2:47 p.m., a white SUV pulled into the cul-de-sac. Then another. Then a third. EPA. Sandra came storming out of her house, clipboard in hand, confidence cracking just slightly when she saw the badges. She didn't look at me. She looked at Aisha, Nyla, and Keisha. And for the first time that day, she looked afraid, because this wasn't about fishing anymore. This was about public water. And once the federal government traces contamination upstream, there's no such thing as HOA rules anymore. Only consequences. By late afternoon, the truth stopped being deniable. The EPA didn't rush. They never do. They moved slow, methodical, precise, like people who already know what they're going to find. I stood beside their folding table while Aisha Johnson, Nyla Brown, and Keisha Carter watched every test strip change color, blue, then darker, then toxic green. One of the agents looked up at me and asked quietly, "How long ago was the chemical introduced?" "Just after sunrise," I said. His jaw tightened. Copper sulfate doesn't disappear. It sinks. It binds. It travels. Aisha folded her arms, trying to stay calm. So when my mom cooked breakfast this morning? The agent nodded once. Yes. No one spoke after that. Sandra finally approached, heels clicking against the pavement like nothing was wrong. Clipboard clutched tight. Smile rehearsed. I followed HOA guidelines, she said sharply. This is private property. The EPA agent didn't even look at her. This lake feeds a shared aquifer, he replied. That makes it federal jurisdiction. Sandra's face drained of color. Nyla stepped forward, holding up her phone. You called it decorative. You said it didn't matter. Sandra snapped back. You're recording without permission. Keisha didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. My little cousin was vomiting before noon, she said. Permission stopped mattering then. The agents began photographing everything, the bags. The shoreline, the stream outlet Sandra claimed didn't exist. They logged serial numbers, took soil cores, sealed water samples. Every step felt heavy. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. I watched Sandra back away, phone pressed to her ear now, voice shaking as she argued with someone who clearly wasn't helping her anymore. The EPA lead agent turned to me. Mr. Hutchinson, you did the right thing documenting this. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. The lake was quiet again, but not peaceful. Not yet. Aisha looked at the water and said softly, She thought she could control everything. She did, I replied, until reality showed up. As the agents loaded their equipment, one thing became clear to everyone standing there. This wasn't an HOA dispute anymore. This was an environmental crime, and the next phase wouldn't happen on the shoreline. It would happen in court. The emergency HOA meeting didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like a reckoning. 60 residents packed into Sandra Kirkpatrick's living room. Sunlight pouring through glass walls that suddenly felt too exposed. No candles this time, no music, just tension hanging thick in the air. I stood near the coffee table, spreading out documents one by one. Deeds, surveys, environmental studies, EPA preliminary findings. Sandra tried to regain control. This is being blown out of proportion, she said, voice tight. We followed aesthetic guidelines. Aisha Johnson leaned forward. Aesthetic guidelines don't come before drinking water. Murmurs rippled through the room. Nyla Brown held up a bottle. This is what my tap smells like now. Sandra's committee avoided eye contact. Keisha Carter spoke next, calm but firm. You told us it was algae. There was no algae. Sandra cleared her throat. Professional treatment is common practice. I finally spoke. Professional treatment requires permits, testing, and disclosure, I said, none of which happened. I placed the EPA intake form on the table. Silence. One resident asked, So, are we safe? The answer mattered more than any argument. We don't know yet, I said honestly. And that's the problem. Sandra shifted tactics. This lake is HOA-managed property. I slid the original covenant forward. Lot 47 retains full lake rights in perpetuity. Several longtime residents nodded. They remembered. Bill Rodriguez spoke up. That was always the deal. Sandra's confidence cracked. This isn't personal, she said. Aisha shook her head. It became personal when kids got sick. The room turned. Sandra realized she was alone. The projector still hummed behind her, frozen on a meaningless slide. I watched as the committee members quietly distanced themselves one by one. This wasn't about fishing anymore. It was about trust. And trust was gone. Sandra gathered her clipboard, hands trembling. The HOA will revisit this later, she said weakly. No, I replied. The EPA will. As people filed out, neighbors stopped whispering and started talking openly about water filters, medical checkups, bottled supplies. The lake wasn't just scenery now. It was evidence. And Sandra finally understood something she should have known from the beginning. You can't spin your way out of contamination. The EPA trucks arrived 3 days later, bright white vehicles rolling slowly through. Pinehaven like a parade nobody wanted to see. Clipboards out, cameras on, water testing kits unpacked right beside the lake. Sandra Kirkpatrick once called decorative. Sandra watched from a distance, sunglasses hiding nothing. Aisha Johnson stood next to me, arms folded. So this is real now. It was real the moment chemicals hit the water, I said. 2 agents approached the shoreline, kneeling to collect samples. One of them nodded toward me. You the one who made the report? I handed over my documentation, photos, timestamps, chemical residue logs. 30 years in water treatment teaches you one thing. Paper beats power. Nyla Brown filmed quietly on her phone. People deserve to know. Sandra finally stepped forward. This is unnecessary panic, she said. The HOA acted responsibly. The agent didn't even look up. Ma'am, copper sulfate without permits is a federal violation. Silence. Keisha Carter whispered, She's done. The agents tested multiple intake points. The lake, the underground spring access, even household taps from volunteer homes. By noon, residents gathered in clusters, whispering again, but this time not about fishing, about safety, about trust, about whether they'd let their kids drink tap water again. Sandra's phone buzzed nonstop. Emails, calls, messages she couldn't spin away. An agent pulled me aside. Preliminary results show contamination levels exceeding safe limits. My stomach tightened. Sandra heard it too. She snapped. This will destroy property values. Aisha turned to her. Poison already did that. No one defended Sandra now. Not the committee, not the newcomers, not even her closest supporters. That afternoon, official notices appeared on doors, boil water advisories, temporary restrictions, warnings printed in bold black letters. Sandra retreated indoors. For the first time since she arrived, Pinehaven didn't revolve around her. It revolved around consequences. That evening, I walked the shoreline alone. Sunlight still shimmered on the water. But something had changed. The lake wasn't just memory anymore. It was proof. And Sandra finally understood the rule she'd ignored from day one. You can bully neighbors, you can twist bylaws, but you can't intimidate science, and you definitely can't outmaneuver. The truth once it's flowing through everyone's taps. The emergency HOA meeting was called for noon. Sandra Kirkpatrick insisted on it. She believed control still lived inside paperwork, microphones and raised voices. What she didn't understand was that authority disappears. The moment trust evaporates, sunlight poured through the community center windows, illuminating every nervous twitch on her face. Dale Hutchinson arrived early, evidence binder tucked under his arm. He didn't sit in the back anymore. He took a front row seat. Aisha Johnson, Nyla Brown, and Keisha Carter sat together on the right side, quiet, focused, watching everything. Sandra cleared her throat. We are here to address rumors causing unnecessary fear. A murmur rolled through the room. Dale stood up calmly. These aren't rumors. These are test results. He handed copies to the board. Pages turned. Eyes widened. One board member whispered, These numbers can't be right. They are, Dale said. And they match 8 months of chemical dumping. Sandra snapped. That lake is not a water source. Keisha leaned forward. Then why does it show up in our taps? Silence hit harder than shouting ever could. Aisha spoke next, steady and sharp. My little cousin has been sick for weeks. Doctors couldn't explain it. Now we know why. Sandra's voice shook. You're exaggerating. Nyla stood up, phone in hand. I filmed the EPA tests. The readings were live, 40 times the safe limit. Residents gasped. Sandra looked to the board, searching for allies. None met her eyes. A certified letter was slid across the table by the HOA treasurer. Sandra, these are legal notices. The EPA, County Health, immediate suspension of your authority. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was collapse. Effective immediately, the treasurer continued. You are removed as HOA president pending investigation. Sandra's chair scraped loudly as she stood. You're all making a mistake. Dale looked at her evenly. No, you did. Parents stood. Neighbors spoke over one another. Anger, fear, betrayal filled the room. Aisha crossed her arms. You didn't just poison water. You poisoned trust. Sandra walked out alone. No applause. No defense. No followers. Outside, the sun still shone. Birds still sang. But Pinehaven felt different. The community had finally chosen truth over titles. And Sandra Kirkpatrick's power ended not with a scream, but with silence. By Wednesday morning, the situation had crossed a line no HOA rulebook could fix. The EPA arrived quietly. No sirens, no announcements. Just dark vehicles pulling into Pinehaven under a bright blue sky, their presence calm but unmistakably serious. Agent Miguel Rodriguez stepped out first, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. Dale Hutchinson met him at the curb. "I'm glad you came," Dale said. "We wouldn't be here if this wasn't real," Rodriguez replied. Aisha Johnson watched from across the street, sunglasses hiding the anger she'd carried for months. Nyla Brown stood beside her, arms folded. Keisha Carter filmed everything on her phone, sunlight reflecting off the screen. The agents moved fast. Water samples, soil tests, underground flow scanners. What they found erased every remaining doubt. Copper levels weren't just dangerous, they were criminal. Agent Rodriguez turned to Dale. This contamination didn't happen once. It happened repeatedly. Sandra Kirkpatrick stood on her porch, arms crossed, trying to look unbothered. "You're overreacting. That pond is decorative." Rodriguez didn't raise his voice. "Ma'am, decorative water doesn't poison 47 wells." That sentence traveled through the neighborhood faster than gossip ever had. Residents gathered, white families, black families, parents holding children, everyone listening. Aisha stepped forward. "My little brother's been sick for weeks," Nyla added quietly. "Doctors couldn't explain it." Keisha lowered her phone just long enough to say, "Now they can." Sandra laughed nervously. "This is harassment. Dale has been fishing illegally." Dale didn't respond. Agent Rodriguez did. "Fishing doesn't cause heavy metal poisoning. Chemicals do." Sandra's smile faded. The agents placed warning markers around the lake, bright red flags against green grass. Visible proof. By noon, County Health Inspector Maria Gonzalez arrived with emergency notices. Bottled water distribution was ordered immediately. Wells were declared unsafe. Parents panicked. Sandra's authority dissolved in real time. She tried calling an emergency HOA vote. No one answered her emails. She tried threatening lawsuits. No one listened. Standing beside the agents, Dale felt something he hadn't felt in months: relief. Justice was no longer theoretical. Aisha looked at the lake, then at Sandra. "You tried to control us. Instead, you exposed yourself." Sandra retreated inside her house, curtains snapping shut. But it was too late. The investigation had begun, and once the EPA steps in, they never step back. Inside Sandra Kirkpatrick's home, the sunlight felt harsh. It exposed everything she tried to ignore. Emma sat at the kitchen table, barely touching her breakfast. Her face was pale, lips dry, eyes unfocused. "Sandra, she doesn't look okay," Richard Kirkpatrick said quietly. "She's just stressed," Sandra replied, forcing a smile. "School? Too much screen time." Emma pressed a hand against her stomach. "Mom, my head hurts." Richard stepped closer. "This is the third time this month." Sandra snapped. "Doctors always exaggerate." But when Emma stood up, her legs buckled. The glass of water Sandra handed her slipped and shattered on the tile. Emma collapsed. The sunlight through the window caught the broken glass, glittering like something beautiful hiding something deadly. At the hospital, monitors beeped steadily. Emma lay motionless, IV lines taped to her arms. The pediatric toxicologist spoke calmly, but every word landed like a hammer. "Emma's blood shows elevated copper levels." Sandra laughed nervously. "That's impossible." The doctor continued. "This level doesn't come from food. It comes from water." Richard's face went white. Sandra shook her head. "Our water is clean. The lake is decorative." The doctor looked at her carefully. "Heavy metal poisoning doesn't care what you call a lake." Outside the room, Sandra leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Sunlight streamed down the hallway, bright and unforgiving. At the same time, across the subdivision, Aisha Johnson filled water bottles from an emergency supply truck. Nyla Brown helped an elderly neighbor. Keisha Carter filmed the scene, narrating quietly. "This is what happens when power ignores people." Back at the hospital, Richard confronted Sandra. "This started when you began treating that lake." Sandra turned away. "You're blaming me now?" "I'm blaming the truth," he said. Emma stirred, whispering weakly, "Mom, the water tastes funny." Sandra froze. For the first time, doubt crept in. Not fear of consequences, fear of reality. Outside, EPA agents continued marking contaminated zones under the bright sky. Red warning flags spread through Pinehaven like scars. Sandra sat alone on a hospital bench, sunlight cutting across her face. realizing something she'd never considered before. The poison she released into the community was flowing through her own home, and Emma was paying the price. The courthouse steps gleamed under the midday sun. Sandra Kirkpatrick walked confidently, legal documents pressed against her chest like armor. "This restraining order will silence him," she told Richard. "Once the judge signs, Dale Hutchinson is finished." Richard said nothing. Inside the courtroom, sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating every dust particle in the air. Judge Eleanor Watkins reviewed the file quietly. "Mrs. Kirkpatrick," she began, "you're requesting an emergency restraining order against Mr. Dale Hutchinson for harassment and environmental misconduct." Sandra nodded firmly. "He's been trespassing, contaminating water, and threatening community leadership." Dale stood calmly at the defense table. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "every claim in her affidavit is false." Sandra scoffed. Judge Watkins raised a hand. "Let's review the evidence." EPA agent Miguel Rodriguez stepped forward. "Federal water tests confirm contamination originating from the lake, not from fishing activity." County Health Inspector Maria Gonzalez followed. "Copper levels exceed legal limits." The contamination timeline matches Mrs. Kirkpatrick's chemical applications. Sandra's confidence flickered. "But the lake is decorative," she insisted. "The community uses city water." Dale opened his folder. "Here is the original subdivision plat, Your Honor," he said. "Private wells, shared aquifer, direct spring connection." The judge studied the documents, then looked directly at Sandra. "Mrs. Kirkpatrick, did you authorize chemical treatments?" Sandra hesitated. "Yes, but for beautification." "And without permits?" Judge Watkins asked. Silence. Across the aisle, Aisha Johnson whispered to Nyla Brown, "She did this to herself." Keisha Carter quietly recorded notes. "This is history," she murmured. Judge Watkins closed the file. "This restraining order is denied." Sandra's breath caught. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "false statements under oath constitute perjury. I am referring this matter to federal authorities." EPA agent Rodriguez stepped forward again. "Mrs. Kirkpatrick, you are now under investigation for Clean Water Act violations." Richard finally spoke. "Sandra, stop!" But it was too late. Outside, cameras flashed as news crews gathered under the bright sky. Sandra emerged pale, no longer in control. Parents stood nearby, clutching water test results. Children held bottled water instead of juice. Dale stepped aside as EPA agents coordinated next steps. "This was never personal," he said quietly. "It was about the water." Across the street, Aisha, Nyla, and Keisha exchanged a knowing look. Sandra stared at the courthouse doors behind her. For the first time, she understood something terrifying. The system she tried to manipulate had finally turned toward her, and the real consequences were just beginning. Thursday morning arrived with crisp, sunlight illuminating the Pinehaven Community Center. Residents buzzed with anticipation for the annual pool party, unaware of the hidden danger flowing beneath their feet. Sandra Kirkpatrick walked confidently through the crowd, clipboard in hand, proud of her supposed lake beautification project. She smiled at neighbors, waved, and directed volunteers setting up tables and decorations. To her, this was the pinnacle of community leadership. Richard Kirkpatrick trailed closely, his worry etched on every line of his face. He had spent sleepless nights, tracking the contamination and documenting their daughter, Emma's rising copper toxicity. He watched Sandra arrange decorative fountains while invisible. Poison seeped into the neighborhood wells. He whispered to himself, "Please, just stop before it's too late." Across the lawn, EPA agent Miguel Rodriguez and County Health Inspector Maria Gonzalez set up monitoring equipment, their expressions grim but focused. They had waited months to intervene at the right moment when evidence could not be disputed. Agent Rodriguez held a federal arrest warrant ready, while Maria checked readings confirming dangerous copper levels in nearby homes. At the edge of the crowd, Aisha Johnson, Nyla Brown, and Keisha Carter observed intently, recording video and notes. They had been key witnesses, confirming chemical purchases, social media posts, and health complaints from families. Their presence symbolized vigilance, accountability, and community solidarity. Sandra, however, remained blissfully unaware of the scrutiny surrounding her actions. The first alarm came when Maria Gonzalez approached the podium. "Mrs. Kirkpatrick, These chemical treatments have contaminated every well in your subdivision, she announced, voice firm yet controlled. The crowd murmured in confusion and alarm, parents exchanging anxious glances. Sandra's confident smile faltered, replaced by defensive tension. Dr. Patricia Kim stepped forward, holding Emma's medical reports and data from 23 other children affected across the community. These symptoms are consistent with severe copper toxicity, Dr. Kim explained. The timeline aligns perfectly with Mrs. Kirkpatrick's chemical applications, parents gasped, realizing the invisible danger lurking in their own homes. Children clutched bottled water and medical records, eyes wide with fear. Sandra attempted to respond, stammering, I thought this was safe. Just decorative. Her words were drowned by the mounting evidence projected on large screens, showing real-time contamination flowing from the lake to each household's well. Richard stepped beside her, voice steady. Sandra, you've endangered everyone, including Emma. It's time to face the truth. Sandra's face drained of color. For the first time, she saw the reality she had ignored for months. The Pinehaven Community Center was filled with a tense mix of relief and lingering fear as Sandra Kirkpatrick sat handcuffed, staring blankly at the floor. Her confident demeanor from weeks past had crumbled into visible shock, the weight of months of negligence finally catching up to her. Richard Kirkpatrick remained close by, his protective gaze fixed on his wife-turned-defendant, a mix of anger and relief crossing his face. The tension of witnessing the truth collide with Sandra's delusions filled the room, every neighbor acutely aware of the damage that had been done. At the side of the room, EPA agent Miguel Rodriguez and County Health Inspector Maria Gonzalez carefully oversaw the scene, their clipboards and monitoring devices, confirming the real-time contamination data. The bright red streams projected on large monitors traced the path of industrial copper from Sandra's decorative lake directly into dozens of family wells. It was an undeniable visual of months of environmental abuse, a testimony to negligence and willful disregard for community health. Families leaned forward in disbelief, some whispering to neighbors while others clutched their children tightly, recalling unexplained illnesses and hospital visits. In the foreground, Aisha Johnson, Nyla Brown, and Keisha Carter recorded the events diligently, ensuring documentation of both the arrest and the evidence presented. Their presence symbolized accountability, a watchful eye that had been essential in bringing the truth to light. Parents, both black and white Americans, mingled in shocked solidarity, exchanging stories of mysterious rashes, digestive issues, and neurological symptoms in their children, all now traceable to the contaminated water. Sandra's voice finally broke the silence. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she murmured, her gaze darting between the monitors and her husband. Richard shook his head, his voice steady. Sandra, intentions don't erase the damage you've done. Emma's health, the children's safety, the entire neighborhood, it all depended on you acting responsibly. Parents nodded, some weeping quietly, realizing that the nightmare of invisible poisoning had finally come to an official reckoning. Children like Emma were receiving urgent care, and preventive measures were being enacted to ensure such contamination could never recur. A collective sigh of relief swept through the crowd, tempered by the gravity of the months-long exposure. The day marked both the end of a crisis and the beginning of healing. Pinehaven had faced the harsh realities of negligence and contamination, but now had a path toward environmental stewardship, safety, and justice. The bright daylight filtering through windows symbolized clarity, exposing the truth and paving the way for collective action and renewed trust in the community. The Pinehaven community stood on the shores of a new beginning. After months of crisis, remediation, and meticulous monitoring, the decorative lake that had once been a source of contamination now glistened with clarity. Richard Kirkpatrick stood near the water, watching his daughter, Emma, laugh freely as she splashed safely along the shoreline. Her recovery from copper toxicity was remarkable, and her bright smile became a symbol of hope for every family that had endured months of uncertainty and fear. The lake, restored to its natural state with native plants and thriving fish, reflected not only sunlight, but also the resilience of the community. Nearby, Aisha Johnson, Nyla Brown, and Keisha Carter gathered a small group of children explaining the importance of water safety, environmental monitoring, and stewardship. Their presence had become invaluable in ensuring that Pinehaven residents would never again face unseen dangers in their own backyards. The lessons were practical and engaging, with devices and demonstrations showing real-time water quality and how pollutants could travel. Children's eyes widened as they learned how individual actions could protect or harm an ecosystem, understanding responsibility at a very young age. Environmental specialists carefully supervised the lake's restoration, checking chemical levels, soil, and native fish reintroduction. Families were active participants in the process, planting native greenery and observing wildlife return. Conversations buzzed with optimism as neighbors shared stories, laughed together, and planned educational community activities. The shadow of Sandra Kirkpatrick's negligence remained a stark reminder, yet it strengthened bonds, creating a collective commitment to vigilance, accountability, and care for the shared environment. Richard spoke with other parents about the importance of regular monitoring and community cooperation. He emphasized preventive measures, medical follow-ups for children affected by the contamination, and ongoing environmental education. Emma, unaware of the depth of the past crisis, simply enjoyed the clean water, her laughter echoing across Pinehaven. The air carried the scent of fresh greenery and hope, contrasting sharply with the months of tension and fear the community had endured. Families felt a renewed connection, not only with the environment, but with each other. Children played safely by the restored lake. Parents shared lessons learned, and neighborhood bonds strengthened. Pinehaven had transformed from a community plagued by negligence into a model of vigilance, education, and environmental care. As the sun reflected off the now crystal-clear water, it symbolized clarity, trust, and a renewed dedication to safeguarding the health and well-being of every resident. Together, they celebrated not just the return of clean water, but the resilience, knowledge, and unity that would define Pinehaven for generations to come.